each side of the river on the ends of the rock ledge that created the dam. And on the left bank of the river, going downstream, it was a fairly wide knoll, and it was a blackberry patch. But there's bear trails going through it two ways, one from the river up and one parallel to the river. But it was one of the few places to camp, so we cleared off the blackberry bushes and set our tent up right in the middle of this bear intersection, so-called. And we had a great hunt there. We shot, I shot a moose and a black bear finally. My partner, Nick Knickerbocker from Rosé, Virginia, got up early in the morning to answer a call of nature, and he had a little old flashlight. The battery's pretty weak, and he ran face to face with a black bear on this. We had a john down along the river, and we used the bear trail to it. And this bear was coming up the trail, and he was going down, and he was telling his secretary about this situation after he got home, and he got to the point where he's facing the bear there at 15 feet. And she said, "Oh my goodness, what did you do?" And he said, "I did." Then there was, when I was in Detroit, we live in Grayling, Michigan now, that's where our plant is, but it began in Detroit, and I had a manufacturing place there, and an archery range, and it was the headquarters for the Detroit Archery Club, and this goes back to 1935. The Detroit Archery Club is still in existence. Anyhow, we had one member of our club who wasn't interested in hunting. He just liked to shoot in our indoor range there. But one year, as we began sharpening our arrows and getting our hunting bows out, he thought it might be nice to hunt with the bow and arrow, because he'd heard us talk about it so much. And so he got himself equipped. He got a heavier bow and broadhead arrows and wool hunting clothes and new boots and the whole works. And we were at that time hunting in a county about 100 miles from Detroit, Allegan County, and it was full of deer and great big bucks, because you couldn't hunt with a gun in there. It was too heavily populated, or at least they thought. And but you could hunt there with a bow and arrow, and there's some just beautiful bucks there. Well, we took, this fellow's name was Charlie Kidder. We took him over, and I put him in a blind that I had used before, real good blind, and he had a lot of fun the weekend. He didn't shoot any deer, but he had a lot of fun. And he was telling a friend of his after that, you know, what a great thing this was, hunting with a bow and arrow, and he got him steamed up, and he bought an outfit. And Charlie, being a weekend expert, took him over there and put him in this blind where I'd put Charlie. Well, he went back, check on him in a couple hours, and he was all excited. A great big buck had come by, and he'd hit it, and oh man, he was all steamed up. So they couldn't find any blood, but they began looking in ever-widening circles, and finally they came onto this great, big, beautiful monster with a big rack of horns. There was much jubilation, and Charlie said to him, "Now, one of the things that are unpleasant in respect to hunting is when you kill something, you have to field dress it." But he said, "I'll show you how." Well, of course, Charlie had never field dressed any, but between the two of them, they said they lost their cookies a couple of times, but they finally got it cleaned out. He said the stench was just terrible. But in those years, if you shot a deer over there, you had to check it in at the wildlife station, where they, you know, measured it and aged it and everything else. So they were able to get the car into where this deer was, and finally got it loaded on a fender and drove triumphantly into the checking station. And the fellow came out, looked it over, and he said, "Well, boys," said, "this deer's been shot with buckshot. He's been dead about a week. I suggest you take him out and bury him." Then another story has to do with Allegan County also. Archers from all over came over there to hunt there. This fellow was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's about 100 miles from Allegan. He was there just for a weekend. And on Sunday evening, he hit a beautiful buck, just at dark. And he went so far as to see that there was a bloody trail. But I didn't want to take any chances in losing it, and he had to be back on the job the next morning. So people were always running into the headquarters there saying, "Oh, I shot a deer, would you look for it?" And they didn't usually have too much luck, because usually the arrow was found in the woods, in the bushes, or in a tree. And he felt that in asking for help for them to look for the deer in the morning, that he should have some evidence that he shot it. So he broke off an arrow, and he dipped it in this blood, which was very plentiful on the trail, and went into the checking station and asked him if they looked for this buck. He said, "Look at this, I shot a big buck." He told him where it was, and he had the evidence, you know, so they said, "Yes, they go look for it in the morning." Well, they went out and just gone a short ways in the trail, and they found the buck. And they called him up and said, "Well, we found that deer up there where you told us to look, and we got it in a cooler." And he said, "Well, I'll be down there next weekend." And so he went down there, and they said, "Well, we found this deer, but a piece of arrow in it doesn't match the piece that you gave us." Well, okay, then he had to confess and told them what he had done. And they said, "Well, you lied to us before. How do we know you're not lying to us again? You can have the deer if you can produce the back end of the arrow that matches the piece we got from the deer." So he went back there, and he crawled around his hands and knees, and he finally found the end of the arrow that broken off from the deer, and he got his deer. Yeah, turn it on. All right, now, I've been to Africa 3 times. First time, 1955. And all I was able to do there that time, as in many other hunts in new places or for different kind of game, I found out mostly what not to do the next time I went. And the next time I got to Africa was in 1965. I made another trip then in 1966. In 1965, for some crazy reason, I was interested in shooting an elephant. I had a very good shot, a very good hunt before we went after elephants. Shot a very beautiful greater kudu, water buck. Didn't shoot any buffalo that trip. Shot warthogs and impala, that kind of lesser game. And finally, in the meantime, we had our ears cocked for elephant. One evening, a native came into camp. It was a little spike camp we had, not the main camp. And he said elephants were coming to water at the river near his village every morning about daylight. And there was one pretty good bull in a small group that came down there. So next morning we hit that place at daylight, and the elephants had gone, but we took their trail. They were very easy to track. And we trotted and walked fast for almost 3 hours. We would have caught up with them much sooner, but we ran into a herd of buffalo that went crashing off. And that frightened the elephants, and they increased their pace, and we had to increase ours. And when we caught up with them, I don't know, 12 miles or maybe 15, there were about 200 elephants. And if we had had a more experienced hunter, white hunter, I think we would have not tackled them. But we had a young, aggressive fellow who lacked experience, and we tackled him. This herd was 3 or 4 deep and a quarter mile long, moving along. And we got in close to them, looking for ivory. They were in thick bush. We couldn't always see the ivory, but you could see which one was the biggest. The one was the highest in the back. And the biggest one didn't have any tusks at all, although he was a bull. They break them off sometimes. And while we were looking these over, a cow from down the line winded us and came after us. and we took off. Well, she didn't press it or didn't want to leave the herd, I guess, but the natives, I had a cameraman, we had the outfitter, we had 4 or 5 natives, a couple of them from the village, the chief from the village. And we'd started off with water, but somewhere along the way, the water got lost, or drank or something. Anyhow, we didn't have any water, and it was pretty warm. Well, anyhow, we went back. Well, the natives left us. Too many elephants. We all get killed. And my cameraman wanted to leave. And he said, let's get out of here. And I didn't answer him. And I kind of looked at the outfitter. And, you know, I didn't know. That's my first elephant hunt. How did I know if you get a whole bunch of them, you shouldn't mess with them? But anyhow, we went on. And somehow or the others, the natives kept track of us. And I finally saw a bull standing in the trees. And we worked up on him. We got 40 yards from him. But he was behind bushes. And it just waited. He was headed to go out in front of us from behind the bush. At least that's the way he was standing. And I waited for a couple minutes. And my cameraman was behind me. And finally, he stepped out, and I shot him. It was 40 yards. I had a real heavy arrow. I glued a aluminum arrow into a number 10 microphyte glass arrow, and I got me about over 900 grains of arrow. And I used a razor head with an insert, and an elephant takes about a 5-foot step. And while he was only walking, he was going fast. Anyhow, I didn't lead him enough, and I shot him in the liver. I was wanting to shoot him in the lungs, but I shot him in the liver. And he didn't come at us. He ran off. There were 3 cows with him. They ran off. Well, we sat there for a while, and maybe half an hour. And then we took a trail, and there was blood. No problem tracking. But we kept running into elephants. One bull came at us, and we thought we were going to have to shoot him. The outfit had a .458 Winchester. And, but we didn't. Twice the elephants charged it, but they always stopped short, fortunately. In the meantime, after I made the shot, we picked up the rest of our crew. They appeared miraculously out of the bushes. And we decided that we'd pushed our luck a little too far, and besides, we were a long ways from home. We didn't have any water. So we started for camp. And going back, we walked fast and ran. And I said to the outfitter, what's the hurry getting back? I can understand how we got to hurry to catch up with them, but we know where we're going, and nobody's going to move camp. Well, he said, you'll be less tired when you get there doing it this way than if you just walk slow. And I don't know, that was his theory. Anyhow, we got back to camp, and to this native camp. We were all just, our mouths felt like dry cotton, and all dying for a drink. And they offered us water, muddy water, in dirty gourd mugs, which we had to refuse. And we were kings, of course, because we'd killed an elephant, and they're going to get the meat, and that's a big deal. They killed some chickens, and they had them roasted in 10 minutes. And they offered us those. Well, geez, you stick a knife in, the blood's running out, and I couldn't eat that. Well, anyhow, we finally got to our car, and we had some beer and cold stuff and some sandwiches, and we got back to camp late at night. Our car was not at the village because we'd broken a tie rod, and we had repaired it, but we only had a couple of threads holding the thing, and we didn't want to take it in the bush over Rush Road. But we finally got back to camp, and the next morning another professional hunter, drove into camp. He needed a good machine, and we could get right to the elephant with the hunting car. And of course, the natives had already found it. They had found it that evening, and they took us right in. And here was this elephant. He died about a third of a mile from where I shot him. The following year, I went back to Africa to make a film of hunting Cape Buffalo. In Cape Buffalo are, some people say, the most treacherous game in Africa. Other people tell you the elephant, other people tell you the lion, other people tell you the leopard. And I'm not in a position to give any opinion on the thing because I haven't hunted them all. The rhino is another one, or the big five. But buffalo have a very short temper. The first encounter I had, we were going out through a village, and the chief hailed us down. And he said there was a buffalo been chasing people. They were eating his, the buffalo was eating the garden and chasing the women, and he was down right in the riverbed right now, and would we go shoot him? Well, you have to take all those kind of things with a grain of salt, because they need meat. They want meat. And if they can get you to shoot the buffalo, well, that's a big deal. They got meat. But this was true in this case. They went over to the river bank. And the river was a mighty river in the rainy season, but we were there in the dry season. And there was a high bank, maybe 50 feet high, and there was a third of a mile across another high bank, but there's just a trickle of the river going down in the middle of it. And this other area was covered with elephant grass, which is not grass at all. It's kind of a reed-like thing, and grows, 10 feet high and thick as the hair on a dog. We got over to the bank there, and there were 3 natives there, camped. I say camped. What makes a camp is if you've got a mat, they sleep on just a reed mat, and if you got a mat, you've got a camp. Well, they had been drinking palm juice. They collect shoes from a short ground palm. They cut the top off of it, and the stalk bleeds and runs into it. The leaf is sort of V-shaped. The leaf makes a little trough to drain into a half a gourd, and they have these things set up all over, and they can get pretty high on this palm juice. And they were a little high, but they did know where the buffalo was. They pointed out about 60 yards. He said, right there. Well, I didn't believe him, but as it turned out, that's where the buffalo was. The thing that we didn't know is the buffalo was wounded. He'd been in a snare, and he had a snare around his foot, and his foot below that snare was swollen up to about twice its size, and it was bleeding. Well, okay, that's a fine situation. We're going down that thick, tall grass to get a picture of it, shooting a buffalo with a bow and arrow. Well, I said, hey, that's too thick down there. No, there are openings. There's trails there, and there are openings. And okay, we went down. Should have stayed out of there. And we jumped the buffalo right where he said they were. We was. And we trailed him around. And they had trails all through this stuff. And then we finally decided that this is too dangerous. Besides, we can't get a picture down this stuff. So we started on a trail out. And Louise, I had a different professional hunter this time, Wally Johnson, an old seasoned elephant poacher. He had a 375 Model 70 Winchester. And Louise, I'd taken a 375 Browning over there, and I gave it to Louise, who had been his tracker, his handyman for 17 years. And Wally says he's a good man with a gun, so I said, well, let's have 2 guns rather than 1. So Louise took the other gun. Louise and another native were ahead of us. we were about 40, 50 feet back. Wally, then I was behind Wally, and then my cameraman, and then some more natives behind us. And we heard a wolf off to our left, and here he comes. You couldn't see him, and he was charging by sound. Well, Louise and he was charging Louise and the other guy, who were the farthest from. Well, they melted into those reeds without a sound. And when he hit this trail we're on, here's Wally and me, and he turned and came, coming with his head down to Tasha, you know. And Wally shot from his hip, and he broke his neck shooting right over the horns, and he dropped 10 feet from us. Well, okay, we had another experience with buffalo. And we worked 13 days on just getting a picture of myself and the buffalo and the arrow going in the buffalo. That was the key shot. Anything else didn't matter. You take it anytime. Finally, we had lots of opportunities. I had lots of opportunities to shoot buffaloes, but it was always the thick stuff, or cameraman wasn't there, or what. But finally, we got this chance, and we got the picture of the buffalo, and we had the job finished. But before that, we were taking some liberties with the buffalo that we'd caught in the open. And we're trying to keep him out in the open to get him into a position where we could take this picture. And he got tired of being pushed around, and he came right at the car. I was sitting in the front, they're right-hand drive, these English cars. And I was sitting in the front seat beside Wally, and I had 2 photographers in the back and 2 natives. And one of the natives was holding a big camera, and took both hands to hold that. The buffalo came at us from the side, a little bit of, we're going along, I guess, a little bit of an angle. And Wally tried to dodge him, but he hit the car about the rear wheel with these big heavy horns, and he skidded along the side, and the spare tire stuck out a little bit from the side. It was bolted to the tailgate. He ripped that off, pulled bolts through 1/8 metal, ripped that off, and just at the time he hit the car, we hit a bump. And this native was holding the cameras, Jukas was his name. He went up in the air, and the buffalo pushed the car out and under him when he hit it. And when he came down, the car was not there. And Wally said after me, well, anyhow, I'll continue the story. And the buffalo skidded off, and he made a circle around, and I stepped out of the car. It had stopped at that time, and shot the buffalo. That's, and why I shot it, I don't know, because we couldn't get a picture. I just thought, you know, maybe he should be shot. What does that mean? And everybody else was watching Juco disappear off in the horizon. And well, I said, why was Juco hurt? No, he said, fortunately, he landed on his head. So that's the buffalo story, and it was a great deal. But the next year, or this same year, no, we got the buffalo finished, and I wanted to hunt a lion. There was a professional hunter there named Ken Phelps, who had been chewed up with a lion. He was pretty badly mangled, but anyhow, he had a client there, and they'd found a buffalo that the lion had killed. The lion can kill a buffalo sometimes, not always. And they had shot. There were 2 males, and they had shot one of them. They just wanted one, and they said, if you want to go in, we got a blind there, and it's all yours. So we went down and looked the situation over, and it was kind of in a draw. And they had a blind about 40 yards away. Of course, that's a little far for the bow, so we moved it to about 20 yards and got in it. And we're going to spend the night there. We get in there in the middle of the afternoon. We're going to stay in the evening and in the morning. And just before dark. The line came in, and I raised up to shoot, and he streaked out of there. The lion that they shot, they couldn't get that night because the other lion wouldn't let them at it. They didn't want to shoot both of them. They couldn't get it till the next day, and then they got it, and the other lion wasn't there. So that's kind of a lion we're up with. Well, he streaked out of there, but he was back in about 15 minutes, and I let him get a little closer to the bait, but he was watching. When I raised up, he started out, and I shot, and made a good shot. Hit him in the rear end, in the hip, but it wasn't quite good enough. We took a trail next morning, and he had laid down about 400 yards from there. He had chewed my beautiful aluminum arrow into 4 pieces, and there was a blood spot about that big, but no lion. And those natives are really something on a track. We track this line. They go along, bending over, and snapping their finger. They got a snapping signal for each other. And especially if they lose the track, if somebody finds it, he snaps his finger 3 times. We got track here. And, well, of course, I'm a great hunter, and I was tracking too, and I would call them over. And, wrong track. Not the right line. They could tell with the track what line they were trying. Well, anyhow, after a couple hours, we jumped the line, but he was all right. And we'd had to kill him with a rifle if we wanted him, and that wouldn't have been a bow trophy, so we let him go. Well, then, I said we got to go about 50 miles from here. That's where the lions are. Okay, we piled in a Toyota, went down to another camp that this same outfit had. And on the way, we stopped at a village, and we picked up the chief, whose name was Pala. And he had been the worst poacher around there, but he was now the game warden. And but he knew about lions. And we hired him to guide us on a lion hunt. And he told us where to drive and whatnot. We got down the place, quite a few lion tracks. Shot a couple of wildebeest, and we found a place where there was a thicket about 50 feet in diameter, or 40 maybe. And there was a tree there 20 yards away. It's kind of open country, but there's a tree there 20 yards away. And we shot 2 wildebeest and changed the tree, and then we cleared out the inside of this thicket to use as our blind. And the natives were in there hacking away, and one of them let out a shriek, and there was a python, 12.5-foot python coiled up in there, and I shot him through the head with a blunt, and well, we didn't want him in the blind with us, so I draped him over a limb of a tree about 20 yards out. We got the blind all fixed up, and we used the car as part of the blind, where we had to hide it. And it was covered with brush, and we took all the stuff. We took out the middle and made a fence around. It wasn't a line-proof fence, but it did give us some cover. And we had provisions, and we each had a blanket. We were going to stay the night, get the evening hunt, the afternoon hunt, and the morning hunt. And we dragged these, or one of these zebras, all over the place for miles, laying down a trail. And about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we settled down the blind. I was leaning against a tree in the front end of the blind, and Wally was leaning against the back wheel of the Toyota. We each had a 375 beside us, and the Apollo and 2 natives were in the back end, and they had trimmed a tree for climbing. They didn't think too much of this bow and arrow line business. The natives didn't think too much of this line business, and they trimmed this tree to climb in case of emergency. And just about darkness, I heard a sound out there, cracking of bones, and I peeked out through my peephole, and there's 2 male lions on the bait. One is lying broadside, and one is facing us. And those lions knew we were there. But we found their tracks right just outside of our blind that they'd made going in there. And I picked up the bow and rose up to shoot, and they're both looking at me. And I shot the one that was broadside, and I knew I was tied up to the shoulder, but it didn't know high or low. Flight wasn't good enough. Well, the arrow hit him, and he came at us, but the other one struck off to the left, and I guess that's what changed his mind, because he made a turn right in front of us, and they both disappeared. Well, another 15 to 20 minutes dark. Darkness comes fast in Africa. It's either twilight or bang, it's dark. Well, first thing you know, it's dark. And I don't know how long after that, half hour maybe I'll say, a big roar right outside of our blind, just a short ways out there. It shook the leaves in our blind. And it shook us up, I'll tell you. Because a lion in the daytime is one thing, but a lion at nighttime, he's practically fearless. And here we were, pretty easy targets. We had a blanket, because the nights get cold there. At that time of the year, they get down to about 50, and that's kind of chilly if you run around in shorts. We had a blanket, and we had some groceries. But everyone was too petrified to make a move. As the hours went by, I was even afraid to unfold my blanket and cover myself with it. It just sat there, because this lion roared every, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And a lion, you've heard a cat in a backyard fence, and a lion is about 100 times bigger than a cat, and their volume is just about that much bigger. And when you're sitting out there in the woods and it's dark, it throws the chills up and down your back. I've been in some close quarters quite a few times, but the high point is over in a matter of seconds usually. But this thing was going on. As a matter of fact, it went on till midnight. Well, we didn't know what to do. We discussed it in whispers, Wally and I did. We didn't know whether it was a lion with the arrow in it, or whether it was his buddy, or anything about it. We couldn't imagine a lion just out there, lying there and roaring at us, and just waiting for a chance to jump in there and kill us all. That's the way I felt it. The situation might wind up, and while we had the two guns, we'd have probably shot each other in the melee. Well, I guess it was maybe 9 o'clock or something like that. Louise, Wally's head tracker, he kind of bellied over there to Wally, and they had a whispering session, and Wally translated later for me. He said Louise thinks he can hear flesh tearing. He thinks that the other lion is eating your lion. Well, that didn't make sense to me, because I knew the lion had an arrow in him, and I didn't figure he'd be laying out there 20 yards letting the other one eat him. And if he were mortally wounded, he wouldn't, he was more than 20 yards away when I saw him last. Didn't make sense to me, but then it occurred to me he might be eating that snake, which is the way it turned out. Well, anyhow, we had no way of finding that out. I don't know, an hour or so later, and this roaring keeps on at intervals. Another half hour or so later, maybe an hour, I don't know whether I made the suggestion or Louise made it. Anyhow, why don't you shoot your big gun out there in that direction, and maybe he'll run away. Well, Wally cut his .375 loose, and in that dark, dark night, you could see that flame going out there for 10 feet, and of course it's a big bang when the .375 goes off. And we got an answer immediately, just a big old roar, and that didn't make us any happier. Well, finally, it was along about midnight, I guess. I said to Wally, maybe if we, in slow motion, wormed our way in this car, it was an open car, no top, and the windshield lay over the hood, maybe we could roar out of here and go back to camp and get some sleep and get warm, and then we come back in the morning and see what this is all about. Well, Wally thought that was a pretty good idea. So we very slowly and very cautiously, making as little noise as possible, got our places in the car, and we sat in the seat because we had to keep our head down because there was brush all around. Wally turned the switch on, the motor caught right away, and we roared out of that, brush flying all over. And got out about 100 yards. He made a full circle and swept our back trail with lights, and we didn't see anything, so we headed for camp. And we were about 4 or 5 miles off a north-south road, and the natives over there can take you anywhere in the daytime. How they do, because the country is so much alike, I don't know, and it's flat country. But at nighttime, they don't know where they are, and you know when they're lost because they start jabbering and arguing with each other. And we got lost, and finally we roamed around out there for about an hour, getting nowhere, and I had a compass on my shooting glove, and I said, well, I know we're east of the road, and that way is west. We have to go west to hit that road. Well, Wally didn't have much use for compasses, and he dug out, and he had a toolbox on that car with everything in it, everything all rusty, and down the bottom he had a compass, and fortunately it agreed with mine, and we headed over, and we finally hit this road. We were east of camp, and we were about 10 miles south of camp. And when you hit the road, you got to turn north if your camp is north, and he turned south. And I said, well, we got to go to the right. Well, he didn't believe me on that, but he did turn, and we finally got to camp. And we came back next morning, and we found that the lion that had been roaring outside our blind had eaten about half my snake, and the lion had shot. We found it dead just 200 yards out in the bush. Africa's a great place. I've had not just hunting, but to observe the natives and the animals and the way people live and that kind of thing. It's quite a treat, and it's I really feel like one of God's chosen people to have been able to go to so many parts of the world and to hunt so many different kind of animals. Wally Sr. has a son named Wally Jr., and he's also a professional hunter in the same camp. And he had a little boy that, he's about 12 years old, I guess, that his job was to keep the car clean. And he'd always took kind of shine to me. I couldn't carry my own bow from the cabin to the car. I couldn't do anything. He was always there. And I said to Wally, where'd you ever get that bright young fellow? And he said, well, I was driving through the bush one day, and this kid stood right in the middle of the road. And he said, that's pretty brazen for a native. Now, this is 10 years ago. And I stopped the car, and I said, what do you want? And he said, I want to work. Wally said, well, okay, I'll be by here in a few days, and we'll talk about it. He said, I want to work now. He said, probably took him by such surprise. He said, well, go get your blanket and come along. And as I said, a blanket is practically your only possession down there, and he's been with them ever since. Well, anyhow, his father was this Pala, who was our lion hunter. And on the way down there, this kid went along because he wanted to visit his parents here in that village. And I'd given him some hard candy wrapped in cellophane. And when we were visiting there in the village, his sister was there, and I gave her a piece of hard candy, and she immediately popped it right in her mouth. And he said, no. He opened up her mouth and dug it out. He said, you got to skin it first. Okay. On on this second hunt, we had a, just for kicks, well, not really for kicks, we made a film of it. We had the witch doctor do what they call a kush, which is a spell of magic they cast upon you and your equipment for good luck on the hunt. And this was quite an operation. He was quite a character, and he had all kinds of magic things that he worked with. And he felt real sorry for me. He thought I couldn't afford a rifle. He said that you'd get more hunting if you had a gun. To which I agreed. I have one more story of interest. Well, I have a great many, but there's not time for them now. Matter of fact, we're late in getting out in our evening bear hunt. But I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you about this. I live in Grayling, Michigan, which is up in the deer hunting country, up in the woods. And a friend of mine hunts on some property about 50 miles east of where we live. It's sort of a private place, and they have quite a few deer. And it's a family affair. There are 4 families of them from Detroit come up there for a week's hunt and hunting, and all the kids and everybody else run around the woods with a bow and arrow. Well, I went over there well, they invited me for the weekend, but I couldn't stay overnight. I didn't want to because even all the floor space was full of kids with sleeping bags. Anyhow, I went over there, just got there about noon on Saturday, and I had a copy of the Salooner Tables, the John Alden Knight Salooner Tables, with me from the week before, and that points out the period of the greatest activity for birds and animals and fish. There'd be a high point that's between this hour and that hour, and whenever it comes in the day, and then a low point, that kind of thing. And I asked them if they'd ever, in a visit there over the luncheon table, if they'd ever hunted or guided themselves by the Salooner Tables, and they said no, didn't know what it was, and I told them how it worked. It's based on the moons and tides and whatnot. And well, they were quite amazed. After lunch, they took me in a station wagon, half a dozen kids, and we went to see the property. Well, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I said to my host, gee, you know, if I got to get back tonight, if we're going to do any hunting, maybe we should get at it. And he said, yeah, there's a rye field up here just a little ways, and it's got a blind in it, and I thought maybe you'd like to be in there. And I said, well, fine. I dropped off there, but I didn't want to sit in the blind, and after they got out of sight, I went on a little cruise, and I came over a hill, and down by a swamp, 300 or 400 yards away, there was a little patch of rye, and there was a deer standing in the middle of it. And I didn't have my binoculars, but I figured because he was alone, it was an adult deer, it might be a buck. So I went down the swamp and went through the swamp, and I came out about 50 yards from where the deer, and he was out there feeding in the rye field. And there was no cover after I left the swamp, and it was really kind of noisy. It wasn't fall and it was dry, but I did get behind a tree had been cut down, an oak tree, and a bunch of shoots came out of it. I got behind that, and I was working my way towards the deer. It was about 40 yards, and I made a noise, and he saw me. Well, I didn't have an arrow out of my quiver at that time, but I realized I wasn't going to get any closer, and so I started blatting like a deer and moving out to get from behind. I had 3 or 4 steps to make to get from behind this little clump of brush. So that time I had an arrow on the string, and when I came in the open, I shot. The arrow was going great, right for his shoulder behind it. And when he heard the bowstring, he turned his head to make a turn, or began a turn. And he got his neck right in front of the arrow, and the arrow hit him, broke his neck, and wham. And I hadn't been out of the car but a half hour. And when I went there, you know, all the kids would it wasn't a question of whether I get a buck or not. You could shoot either buck or doe, just how big the rack of horns was going to be. You know, I was all built up. Gee, I could do anything. Well, here I'd done it. It was a buck. It wasn't a big one. So I dressed him out, and there's a trail road, a woods road went along there, and I hit him with some brush there. And I went on hunting, and I damn near shot another spike horn. Before I got back to camp, my host had said if I wasn't in camp by dark, he'd pick me up there somewhere. Well, I went back to camp. I didn't have anything else to do, and my wife and their wives were there, and a couple of kids, and they said, "You get anything?" I said, "Yeah." You know, trying to be as nonchalant as I could. Well, they were polite. They didn't push it too much. But finally, the hunters began to come in, and they said, "You get a deer?" I said, "Yeah." Well, they were too polite to push me on it. They didn't really believe I got deer, but they're too polite to push me on it. Finally, my friend's oldest boy, he's 17, he gave me the business. He said, "Listen, did you get a deer?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I got a deer." "What'd you get?" And I said, "I got a buck." "Where is it?" "Well," I said, "you know where that little rye patch is?" "Yeah." "Well," I said, "it's just in the brush there off the side, on the swamp side. You want to pick it up?" "Yeah." He'd come up there in a white Jaguar with a girlfriend. Big deal. So they went roaring out of there, and they came back with a deer, and then we all got gathered in the house, and they wanted me to tell them the story. And I told them the story just about like I told it to you, except I said after I had moved out from behind the brush and the deer was standing there, I looked at my watch, and I still had 2 minutes to go before the high point, and I had to wait 2 minutes before I shot. And I don't dare go back there because I can't do that again in a million years. See, I shut myself off right there. Well, okay, that concludes this little get-together we've had in the bright, warm sunshine at Bear Camp up in Saskatchewan. I just have one more word to add. I've met the greatest bunch of fellows I think I've ever met in my life, and there are 4 of us here from Bear Archery. We all appreciate so many things that they did so graciously for us. That's it.